back. I'm Kim Bailey, and this is Floral Art Review, where we use DesignEye, our AI, to give us some feedback on a previous competition design of mine, and we look at the principles and elements of design, which is what you would be judged on in a competition, but also I'll give you some of my feedback, looking back on these designs, seeing whether I agree or not with the interpretation, the analysis from AI. This week we're looking at Beyond the Boundaries. Now, this was a design, if I keep looking across because I've got an image of it on the screen as well. It was a design that was part of an online competition. It was during COVID, so it's 4 years ago now from the time I'm recording. So the design image was uploaded and judged on the image. We were allowed a space of about 70 centimetres in width, the height unlimited. And so what my thinking was is that I had this wonderful vase that I picked up some time ago that was an overlapping vase. So it's not a solid vase. There's an overlap, as you can see in the image. There's a gap, and I wanted to use that gap as part of the design to emphasise the fact that not only was the design beyond the boundary of the vase itself, but the vase itself was beyond the boundaries of what we would normally think about in terms of using a vase for a floral design. So I've used wheat. In this country, we're not allowed to use equisetum. It's considered a weed, and so it's not available for use for floral art. So I've used wheat because I wanted very strong lines that could be angled very sharply, and so that's given me this. The stalks of the wheat has given me those angles, as well as the contrast of the wheat heads on it. It blends in with the pattern that is on the vase itself. And I've also used within the vase some jute sliver. Now this is a byproduct of making string, of jute string, and it can be coloured in all sorts of different ways. I've used some natural sliver at the base to mimic and repeat the colour of the wheat and some of the colour that is on the vase. And then I've used a deeper pink because the vase itself does have pink hues through it. As I look at it now, there are things that I would change. But let's see what DesignEye's got to say, first of all, in the analysis, and then its suggestions for improvements for the design. First of all, as an overall comment, it has said that this piece is a highly architectural and conceptual floral design, demonstrating an interplay between geometric structure and organic materials. The title Beyond the Boundaries is well reflected in the extension of the forms beyond traditional floral arrangement constraints, exploring abstraction and spatial relationships. Those of you who've seen some of my other videos will know that I struggle with the idea of abstract in floral art, so I'm pretty pleased that it is seeing that there is some abstraction in this interpretation. I'm also reassured that my idea for making it not just beyond the boundary of the vase, but beyond the boundaries of what we would think of as floral design, has been shown in this particular design. So let's look at the elements of design first of all. Form and structure. The geometric framework, triangular structures made of sticks so that the stems, the stalks from the wheat, creates a strong architectural presence, evoking a sense of movement and tension. So combined with the movement, and one of the reasons I wanted those straight lines and the hard angles was to get that tension in the design as well, because I've got a circular form in the vase and I wanted there to be a very big contrast between the vase and the plant material that I'm using. Sorry if my hands are waving around too much. The organic wheat elements contrast with the rigid angular construction, softening the overall impact. So again, what I said just earlier is that I wanted that contrast within the plant material, but between the plant material elements. The vase is asymmetrical with a sculptural quality, further reinforcing the unconventional aesthetic. So exactly why I chose the vase in the first place, because it is unconventional in terms of a vase. Balance. The weight is distributed asymmetrically, with the geometric framework extending significantly to the left, countered by the solidity of the vase on the right. So an interesting thing to remember when we're doing our designs is that if you've got a solid container, whether it's a vase or some other sort of container, that needs that visual dominance of that element needs to be balanced by the plant material or by whatever you do with the plant material. The triangular repetition creates a dynamic visual rhythm, guiding the eye through the design. However, the lower left area feels slightly heavy as the wheat heads cluster in that section. So what I think it's having a problem with is not just the wheat heads, but there's that element of the jute saliva at the bottom of the vase, the bony coloured, the browny coloured jute saliva. And I think in looking at it here, if I took that away, it doesn't need to be there. I was thinking at the time that it gave the connection between the wheat head, the colour in the wheat heads and the vase and the pattern on the vase, but it doesn't need to be there. If you took that away, then there'd be some space between the wheat head and the vase, and so that would add to the repetition of the shapes and the forms that are being created by the stalks, as well as give your eye a little bit of a resting place and not so much density at the base of that composition there. Texture and materials. The smooth ceramic vase contrasts with the rough fibrous textures of the wheat and natural twine, so that's the jute saliva. The thin wooden sticks, so the stalks of the wheat, introduce a linear quality, emphasising structure and movement. Subtle marbling on the vase adds an organic, earthy touch, complementing the dried plant materials. And this is probably the one area where, within the competition, I know that I should have done something a little bit different. I should have some fresh plant material in there. There wasn't a stipulation that you couldn't use all dried material, but I know, and I should have realised, that this particular judging group likes to see fresh plant material in their competition pieces as well. So I could have introduced that, and perhaps a little bit later would be an idea of how we could have done that. But there is the contrast there between the textures. You know, we've got the rough in the saliva, the rough in the wheat heads, and the very solid and straight lines, whether it's circular or vertical or diagonal from the stalks of the wheat. Colour and contrast. The neutral earthy colour palette, beige, brown, gold and hints of muted pink, creates a harmonious and understated look. The contrast is more about materiality than colour, relying on the juxtaposition of rigid versus organic elements. And that's exactly what I wanted. I wanted the contrast to be very much about the textures in this particular design. Whenever we do a design, we obviously should think about contrast, and sometimes it's in the plant material itself, but I prefer for my designing for it to be in the textures. I like the idea. For me, it's easier to see a difference, a contrast in textures between containers usually, or structures, and the plant material that I use. And so I have developed over this period of time more comfort in making the contrasts in my designs through the textures that are evident in the design. That's something that will come to you in time. You do need to recognise it though, and know that that's where your design preference lies. The background is dark, which enhances the visibility of the light-coloured materials, adding drama to the composition. Now, I wanted to talk about this separately because this was an online competition, and so we could send in the image. So I chose a background. Always choose a plain background. Don't think that a pattern background is going to add to your design, because all it does is distract the judges from looking at your design. So I chose a plain background. I wanted the design to be almost floating in that space that I was allowed for the design, and I wanted it to be a background that would enhance the contrasts in the design itself. Had I used black or some other sort of darker hues in the design, I would have gone for a lighter background, usually a beige or a bony colour, anything that is not particularly a colour, and certainly not a colour that is going to contrast with or compete, I should say, with the design. So I wouldn't use a green and I wouldn't use a blue. I'd probably stick either to white or black or beige for my backgrounds, just because any of those colours is going to allow the design to be prominent and not have the background be incorporated into the design. So we'll move on to the principles of design now. Rhythm and movement, first of all. The diagonal lines of the structure create a sense of upward and outward movement. The placement of the wheat heads follows the geometric framework, reinforcing directional flow. The tension between the controlled lines of the framework and the free-flowing wheat adds energy to the design. And I think also that there is some movement in the vase itself because of that overlapping nature of the vase and the circular framework. The pattern that's on it gives us a little bit of movement up into the design. And then we have these very angular lines, as it says, that make us look for where is the next line that my eye needs to follow. We go up to the top, it does bring us down and back into the vase. There is room for us to move within the design using those lines. There's also an opportunity for us to use the more circular form to follow those more circular lines. Proportion and scale. The elongated triangle forms extend beyond the typical boundaries of a floral composition, fitting the theme well, and that's exactly what I wanted. I wanted it to look like this design was completely outside the vase, so outside the boundary of the vase and outside the boundaries of what we would normally consider a floral design. The vase is well proportioned to anchor the structure, preventing the piece from feeling unstable. The lower wheat elements might be slightly oversized, subtly disrupting the balance. So that's probably something that I would look at. I can see that that's an issue apart from the jute sliver, which I mentioned earlier. The two wheat heads that are facing down at the base area of the design are too close together in their placement in terms of where they finish, where they start, and I would have the one that is furthest away from the vase up a little bit higher, so I'd probably might even angle it back in towards heading so that it mirrored the one that's below it, mirrored it heading back in towards the vase is what I'm trying to say. Emphasis and focal point. The geometric framework is the dominant visual element, drawing attention with its angular complexity. The wheat head serves as a secondary focal point, providing organic contrast. The textured material within the vase adds a subtle point of interest, though it could be enhanced for more visual impact. And I think that's very true. I think the top part of the vase that's got the pink sliver in it should have been, the sliver itself should have been higher up so that it is obviously at the top of that vase, because your eye would travel up through the pattern that's on the vase and see that similar looking shape in a different texture at the top of the vase, and it would then, you would travel up to the top of the stalk, down and then across and back into the vase again. So I can see that the visual emphasis, the main visual emphasis is the triangles, the angular forms that are created by the stalks, and there's a softening of that with the wheat heads. So let's look at some suggestions for improvement. Enhance the focal area. The vase is beautifully sculptural, but competes with the geometric structure for attention. A small, delicate floral element within the vase could create a stronger connection between the vessel and the external framework. And I think that that's correct. And what I would like to do this time around, should I redo this design, is actually follow the line at the top of the vase and come down that flap with some small floral element interspersed with the wheat, so that there is that connection between the two parts of the design. It's not just the design in the vase and then the structural element outside of the vase, but to give it some sense of the form that is that vase, soften the edges of the vase, and also introduce another element of being beyond the boundary. So these flower heads will be beyond the boundary of the vase itself, but still part of the overall design. So I've got some ideas of what I could do with that suggestion. Refine the balance in the lower section. The wheat heads at the base are visually heavier, slightly disrupting the balance. Trimming or repositioning some of them could enhance the overall harmony. So we talked about that just previously, about either changing the angle or bringing them to different heights or lengths so that it creates a little bit more space in that area there. Also taking out that brown sliver, so that we've got a bit more of negative space between the last of the wheat heads and the edge of the vase. Increase contrast in materials. The colour palette is cohesive, but subtly introducing a small pop of stronger hue, deep rust, dark burgundy or black, could add a focal contrast. I'd probably go for the dark burgundy because I think that would blend in better than the deep rust to my eye anyway. And as I was saying earlier, what I would do is put it in, use it as the small flower heads that went around the rim of the vase and then down the edge of the flap of the vase, so that, and intersperse that with some wheat heads so that we get a sense of that darker colour, still with probably the pink sliver around it, just for the textural contrast, but to bring that part of the arrangement with some fresh flowers into the rest of the arrangement. So I'm thinking, as I'm talking, I'm thinking that probably paper daisies would work in that sense, because we can get the two colours in it. I can get the bony rust-coloured centre and the deeper burgundy in the petals of those flowers. Plus it also means that if I use those, I can have them fresh and then I can leave them and they'll dry and they'll still be useful afterwards as a dried arrangement. So the final thoughts from DesignEye on this design: Beyond the Boundaries is a thought-provoking structural floral art piece that successfully merges geometric abstraction with organic elements. Minor refinements in the balance, emphasis and contrast would elevate the composition further while maintaining its innovative and boundary-pushing essence. So all of that is good feedback. Yes, I can see now why I needed to have some other plant material in the design to enhance the feeling of a unified design. The more I look at it, the more I feel like the vase is dominating too much, and I need to do something with that side of the design for it not to be visually dominant. But there you have our reflections from DesignEye this week. I hope that that has given you some food for thought. There are opportunities for you to upload your own designs and get some feedback for yourself to help you on your floral art journey. But let's leave this one for today. I'm Kim Bailey and this is Floral Art Review.